We here at Reasoning Through the Bible like to periodically pause from our normal ministry and give an update of what's going on with us in our ministry. So that's what we've got today, is an informal talk about what we've been planning and what's coming up and just what our thoughts are about the ministry. So that's what we have for you today. I hope you enjoy it. Now, what I wanted to do is, it'd been a little while since we did just a general thing. And so totally unscripted, not sure we're even going to use this. We'll see. But informal, those of you, if we use this and it's the audio only, then some of what we do is for the video online. And I'm not wearing the hat, mainly just to show people that I'm not bald.
But you still hadn't fixed your eyebrows.
I had that, still hadn't fixed the eyebrows, but there's whatever that means. But I wore this hat, and we were wearing jackets just to make it a little formal, and the hat was really just a shtick and just something visual to remember by. But people saw it and thought I was bald. So mainly don't wear the hat just so we're not bald. But one of the things that we do here at Reasoning Through the Bible is Steve and I had thought through how to approach our ministry and what we're going to do. And Steve and I get together periodically and talk about theology and different theological stuff. And when we started doing podcasts, okay, what do we do? And what tack do we take? And it just seemed to us that there's a whole lot of things online about Bible teaching. Most of it falls into one or two or three or four, I guess, categories that, or one is either pastors with their Sunday morning sermons, and there's many of those, and a lot of them are really good, and some of them are not so good. But there's just a lot of them. It seems like every pastor in every church in the world has their sermons out there. And then there's also people that focus on theological topics. And so you can go out there and you can find Calvinists and Arminians and amillennialists and dispensationalists, and you can find all these people approaching these topical things, and you can find apologists and different things out there promoting different subjects and different denominations and things. And it just seemed to us that what was needed was just good, slow, methodical, deep Bible study. And because of that, then what we're finding over time is that there's some people very interested in that, and then there's a whole lot of people that aren't. When we started out, the philosophy behind it was there just seemed to us that there's a whole lot of people in churches that were a little bit deep, not very deep. And then there's this other knothole gang that just eats, sleeps, and breathes theology, and never the twain shall meet, because they talk past each other. So what we want to do is bridge the gap and start where the average church member was, and then build it up to some of these theological topics, but don't just live there. Just mention it and then move on. Right? Isn't that kind of the idea?
That, and we also wanted to provide this type of teaching to smaller churches as well, because my father preached in smaller churches whenever I was growing up. He didn't have a church he didn't pastor a church as I grew up, but he was an interim pastor for many churches around the area where we grew up, and they were all small churches. And then as he retired, he pastored a small church, a couple of them. And so those are the type of churches that he would preach in. Those are the ones that I remember as a kid going to listen to his sermons and stuff. So those type of churches have good pastors in them, but they don't have the funds to necessarily get the materials for their teachers to give to their congregates. So that's one of our goals too, is to reach these small churches and be able to provide them with some free resources for them to then be able to have their teachers provide to them, and then also maybe small groups that can branch out, the people and teachers that want to do small groups. And we are just now started introducing some study guides. We've been putting out your teacher notes, leader guides for them. Now we're going to be adding to it, and we've actually published our first one in the book of James, study guides for people to go and study either on their own or in a group. And then we'll have a leader guide / teacher guide, which will have your notes in it for James also. And that's our first full both study guide and leader guide book that we're going to have.
So one of the questions we have now is, okay, where do we go and what we do? And Steve and I are going to stay the course as far as doing this. We kind of sort of got a plan on how to approach this. Is the books we kind of just pray about and decide as we go. What I wanted to talk about for a minute though was there's, when you go online with these things, there's, at least I feel, some degree of pressure to grow the audience. And what we never wanted to really do is grow the audience just to grow an audience. One of the things that Steve and I always criticized were church leaders and pastors and ministry leaders that were just pandering to large audiences. And so far, we hadn't had that problem. We don't have mass crowds beating our door down.
Well, and here's the reason. Here's one of the main reasons is they do get them in. They come into the main service, but the vast majority of them then don't get plugged into a small group. Where the small group is where they have the more methodical teaching of going through books, or at least the where they can ask questions and things like that. So the majority of these people come in, and a lot of them come in and just are there for a few months and go out. Some of them, most of them come in and maybe never go to a small group where they actually then start getting discipled.
Right. So we were really about the meat and potatoes Bible teaching. Now, what a lot of people do online, and they get audiences by talking about things that large groups of people want to hear. And there's large groups of people that want to hear things from like systematic topic standpoints. I have no doubt at all that we could grow an audience if we stood up and did anything severe towards a well-known figure. I mean, pick anybody on any part of the Christian spectrum, both really solid people on down to the really, really not so good people. If we just picked one that already had an audience, and we out and did critiques of them, then we could get an audience. And I don't have personally any problem at all standing up and saying Joel Osteen's a false teacher. And I don't have any problem at all standing up and picking somebody like a John MacArthur or any of the buddies, Osteen, Piper, Heiser, any of these guys, and critiquing them. And the harder we would either support them or not support them, the greater the audience we'd get.
And here's one reason why, because you have the spectrum where you have some people that just want to know what's our take or anybody's take on this teacher or this pastor. Are they good? Are they not? All the way down to people that already have a formed opinion and they want to know if somebody else is going to beat them up or on the other end, somebody else is going to praise them. So that's how you get the bigger audience, is because you're reaching out to all different kinds of people that want to know about that particular pastor and what your approach is going to be to them.
Yeah. So that seems to be on online, the 800-pound gorilla is YouTube. YouTube just has the audience. It's the medium, and that's where you go to get the big audiences. And it tends to draw people if you do relatively shorter things that are relatively controversial. So if we went out there and did 12 minutes on Roman Catholicism or Calvinism or any of these topics, then and hit it hard enough, you can get an audience. It's just, we just didn't think that was really the purpose of why we ought to be here.
Because controversy sells.
Controversy sells. But let's talk about something, Steve, that as an example. As we record this, we're right in the middle of teaching Zechariah. And one of the reasons we picked Zechariah was because we knew it was really critical as far as end times prophecies, right? Mm-hmm. The Old Testament minor prophet of Zechariah, it's only about 14 chapters, but it's really critical in terms of end times teachings and these areas. So typically, like when we were doing research, you go out and okay, what's people's, you look different commentaries and things. Well, what do people teach about Zechariah? And the vast majority of it zip down to chapter 14 that has this passage about the Messiah coming back and the mountain splitting in half. And there's some things in there about the temple. And so the vast majority of attention that it's ever gotten, and not all, but the majority, is centered around these couple of three themes that are has the most little sizzle to it. And there's just so much more to the book. And yeah, it's important. But for example, we were mentioning it to some friends of ours, and the first question you get is, oh, what are you going to do with amillennialism? Well, if we were to... Because
the amillennialists use some of the things from Zechariah to support their view of amillennialism.
Right. And so do the premillennial dispensationalists and things like that.
Right.
So there's this arm wrestling that's been going on in the theological crowds about, okay, how do you interpret these passages? So we could get a little more sizzle and a little more audience if we were to lead with, oh, amillennium's wrong, and here's why, and things like that. But that's not really why we were here.
Well, and let me just add this too, along with eschatology, the big hitters in eschatology is Daniel and Revelation and the Olivet Discourse in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and a few chapters in Ezekiel and a few chapters in Isaiah and things like that. And even in Daniel, they usually go to the latter part of Daniel. And so those are the big heavy hitters. And if you go out there looking for currently eschatology or end times, those are what's going to be taught. And those are taught by topic. And they only go through 3 or 4 chapters of Ezekiel. And then even in that, there's only a few verses in those chapters that they talk about. So what we wanted to do that keeps in line with what we do as a ministry was, well, let's go through Zechariah because it is quoted from the New Testament, and it has eschatology things in it.
Easy for you to say.
But the prophets are important, and there's minor prophets: Micah, Joel, Haggai. All of those minor prophets have eschatological, apocalyptic things in them, which build a good foundation for end times views and end times teaching. So that's another reason that as we go through here, we will eventually get to Daniel and Revelation. We've already gone through Matthew. We talked about the Olivet Discourse. But when we get to those two big heavy hitters of Daniel and Revelation, I think our hope is that we'll have many of these minor prophets already have gone through them verse by verse, which will have a good foundation and reasoning behind them so that when we refer to them, when we go through Daniel and Revelation, it gives people a better overview of all of the apocalyptic and all of the eschatological views, and not just those heavy hitting chapters / verses in Daniel and Revelation.
Right. As an example, we were recording. We're about I don't know, part of the way through Zechariah as we record this, And with that, I remember, I haven't gone back and heard them yet, but the chapter 1 and chapter 2 that we did of Zechariah, the day we recorded them, to me, it struck me as some of the best stuff we've ever done, simply because it covered so much good spiritual rich ground. And what ends up happening is people either, I mean, not knocking the pastors and not knocking the Sunday morning Bible teachers, because they're just limited in time. You just don't have the time for 45 minutes or 30 minutes on a Sunday morning. You just don't have the time to go into these details.
And the class members, they travel, they're in and out, they have family members. And so that's another reason why we started this ministry, was that we could be consistent and refer people to an overview and a verse by verse study of a complete book and give them some consistency.
Now, that said, and I will throw out this hand grenade, is there are a lot of pastors that do not want to go deep. They just don't want to. They want to keep it high level, and they could go deep. I mean, there are people like John MacArthur that have gone deep. But there, I mean, looking past years, Jonathan Edwards, for crying out loud, was a pastor of a local church that was mainly farmers, that was before the days of public school, and he had really deep stuff. So there's really no excuse for not occasionally going deeper in a church, and they just don't.
And you have a story or example of the opposite end. Earlier we talked about churches that just seek to get people in. The opposite end are ones that really, really go deep. But do you have an example of one church or something, spent 3 years in just Romans?
Oh, well, yeah. The church I was saved in many years ago was one of the pastors decided, hey, we're going to start going through Genesis. And he started at chapter 1, verse 1, and he was kind of going through. He did 18 months of Sunday morning in Genesis, and I don't think he finished chapter 5. There was another guy I bumped into, I think it's the one you were probably thinking of, Steve, that I had just accidentally talked to this guy, and he said he had been teaching Romans for 20 years. Now, okay, Romans is a complex book and it's important, but there's other books, other stuff too.
Right.
So one thing, there's just so many people that either get Christianity light for 30 minutes on Sunday morning, and that's all they do, or they live in this world of looking at all the scriptures from this theological perspective of Calvinism or dispensationalism or amillennialism or any of the other isms. They've got this theological system that they believe in, and some of them good systems, right? Not knocking systematic theology at all, but that's all they do. And they don't really take the time to start at chapter 1, verse 1 and go through and teach all these things. As an example, just this morning, Steve, again, in Zechariah, doing my homework, it talks about the temple. It's been a little while since I read those chapters in Ezekiel. Starting in Ezekiel chapter 40, there's a handful of chapters that goes into all this detail about the temple. It measures the doorways and all this thing. Just a handful of chapters about detail. In Ezekiel chapter 43, there's a verse in there where God's glory comes into the temple, and it's God speaks to Ezekiel. And with that, he's saying, I will be on my throne, and the sole of my feet will tread in this house, in the temple, and be with Israel. The very next sentence in the same verse is, because their kings had all this sin and all this death, right, of Israel. So we could approach that from a standpoint of, we're going to teach premillennialism or amillennialism, and it's real easy to beat up on the amillennialists because there's so much inconsistencies. And I don't have any problem saying that. That passage in Ezekiel 43 that I was just talking about, in the same verse, he's saying, my spirit's gonna be with Israel. And he's talking about this future time. Well, okay, great. That the amillennialist and the covenant theologian takes that and they say, okay, well, that's the church and that's salvation. And he's cut off ancient Israel. The problem is, here you've got Israel in two sentences in the same verse, one of them being the church and the other one being ancient Israel that got condemned, because he's not being with the church with a spirit in it and then cut it off too, right? Which is in that verse in Ezekiel 43. So what we could do, and we draw a bigger audience, is lead off with, okay, we've totally refuted such and so position, and then just go through and pick out those things and beat them up, and we'd get a bigger audience. We draw this crowd of these theologians and theologian wannabes that eat, sleep, and breathe a particular theology and are just there for the controversy, but we never would really exegete the passage, because once you get drawn into that, then you're spending all your time replying to, and because Steve, we've been kind of under the radar here, and we're able to say our very, very strong things
under the radar.
Nobody's noticed. But once people start noticing us and we start refuting us, then you get drawn into replying to these things, and that's just kind of where my head is right now.
Well, and as that, you then cater to that audience, or not really necessarily cater to it, but that's the audience you get. And then that audience only gets so big, and then you're one of many other types of things. So we feel that going chapter 1, verse 1 through the last chapter, last verse, through every book gives a variety for everybody, no matter what their view is. And our hope is, even if the particular views that we don't hold to all millennialism, but we would hope that the all millennialists would listen for not just things that are associated with eschatology, but for the other verse by verse things, and at least also listen to the arguments that are made, not to convince them to leave all millennialism. That's up to them to decide what they want to do. But we feel that going verse by verse reaches the broadest audience that there could be. And because there's just so much good stuff that's in the scripture.
Another example, we said as we're making this recording, we're in the middle of Zechariah. Zechariah talks a lot about prophecy, and is it end times or is it speaking of the church age? That's one of the major questions. Confession time. I walk into doing Zechariah. I taught it a little over the years, but not a lot. And I knew part of what was in there, but I need to study deeper. I've not really read ever, and don't plan to read, to be perfectly honest, a lot of these end times books that are written from a perspective. Now, I tend to lean premillennial, but I'll confess I've never really read a lot of premillennial or amillennial end times books. It's just, reading is difficult for me. I mean, I got through seminary through brute force. It was difficult. I don't read well. I don't read fast. And I've got books that I'll never get around to reading already. And I just don't approach the book, I guess is what I'm saying, from a preconceived standpoint of already having read in detail these systems of end times views. I kind of know the general perspective that they're approaching it from. And so I know some of here's the questions that are going to arise, but I don't know all of the ways that these pre-mill, post-mill, amill, pre-trib, I don't know how all those people have fit all the little puzzle pieces together around the millennium. And that's one of the questions, the major questions of Zechariah is, how does the millennium fit into this book? And so I don't approach this book having read a lot of that. What I do is I know kind of the approach, and I'm saying, okay, what does the text say? Is it present tense? Is it past tense? Is it future tense? How are we going to exegete this passage? And then that'll tell us whether it's going to fit into some end times view. And that's really the perspective that I approach these things from, and not having some preconceived version of having worked out all these details of some systematic theology of end times.
So in general, we view ourselves as being biblicists. We approach the Bible and we go through the text, and we use inductive study methods to exegete the text and to look at it. And we do have a hermeneutic that says, let's take the reasonable use of the language and what does it say? And that's how we approach the scripture in general. And I think that's kind of the way that it was written. It was written that way with that in mind. The scripture wasn't written with systematic theology in mind. It was written to convey a story, a narrative, and to reveal God and who he is. So that's the way that we approach it. And I think that from that, you can formulate some of these things that you talk about where it fits into. And we've come to a position on some of the things, but we're open. However, when I say that, we have gotten
We've gotten a few
informations of cut and pastes into our comments, and they are cut and paste because you can tell they are, and they're just the basic arguments that are out there that you can read very easily. And so they're not really convincing arguments because we've looked at them before, and they don't stand up to what we feel what the scripture is saying.
Yeah. So what else would we want to tell people that just about us?
I think that we would just really hope that the people are getting something out of it. We have a way that we can, going through each of these books, podcasts to me are the new radio. Even though they've been out there for 15 years or even maybe 20 years, they're new radio. When I was commuting back and forth to work, there was a couple of radio programs of some teaching that I'd listen to on the morning commute. And there was a couple on the evening commute when I came back, but you couldn't go back and stop it. You couldn't go back and listen to it. If something came up during that commute at that time, there wasn't any way to go listen to it again. There's things that have evolved where you can go to the websites now and do that. But with these podcasts, you can listen to them at your pace. You can go and listen to them. And if you wants to listen to it again, you go back to the podcast and listen to it again. We just think that it's a good format for people. And we have a video side of it that's the same as the podcast. The audio is a little bit cleaner. It's cleaned up a little bit, meaning that we've taken some of the pause and the double words out of it. And I think that the audio portion of it is good. Again, when you're commuting, when you're walking, when you're exercising. And we just think that it's a good format. And in our teaching, because we still teach, I taught our church Nehemiah not too long ago, but it was a 6-week course to go through Nehemiah. We had already done it. We went through 18 sessions. So as we went through it, I referred the class to the Nehemiah sessions that went with what we were going to look at on Sunday. And most of them listened to it. Some of them didn't because for whatever reason. But that's a way to be able to help any of you people that are teachers out there, any of our audience that are teachers. It's a way to help you assist in your class and in your teaching. And as I said before, our goal is to put out materials so that you can form your own classes and Bible studies. And you can also even just do your own study if you want to by going to some of these leader guides that we're starting to put out.
Now, the other thing is if you are interested in theology and doctrine, on our YouTube channel, we have a playlist. That's the term that in the YouTube world, we have a playlist called Doctrine and Theology. And when we do a topic in the midst of a book that does have a theological point to it, we tend to put it on that playlist. And there's a large number there now. So we do a fair amount of theology as we're going through these things. I mean, I'm quite familiar with Reformed theology and different aspects of salvific theology and all these controversies. So those we do deal with. What we don't do is just put it out there as an argument, trying to draw an audience.
And the playlist, we have them broken up by books that are there, but we don't have all of our content because we started video a little over a year after we started the ministry. So books like Acts, and I think there's another one that they're not on the YouTube platform. They're only in the audio platform. Where our website is also broken up by books. So if you go to our website, go to the book series, you'll see each book that we've done. You can go in, you can listen to them, each session in order, however you want to, as far as the pace that you want to go to. And if we have done video on it, you'll see the video there too.
Right. So we do take questions. You can submit questions we have an email address or via our website. Go to reasoningthroughthebible.com, or you can send us an email at info, that's INFO, at reasoningthroughthebible.com. And we keep questions and save them up and do a session every now and then with half a dozen questions. I'd like to do a live stream at some point, Steve.
We will.
And get some interaction with the audience. What we're a little scared to do is announce we're going to have a live stream and then nobody show up but us.
We will be doing live. Each year we have added new things. We're in our third year, finishing up our third year. We will be doing live streams. We definitely will at the first part of next year. And I've already got some ideas on that I want to talk with you about. We'll do at least maybe one live stream a month, probably working into twice a month. And at some point, we might even do once a week.
There's some people I'd love to interview and put on.
We're going to do
that have some good Christian point to them. It's just our main thrust was always teaching the scriptures. And Steve and I feel this sort of commitment to getting this teaching down. And basically, Steve, we're doing long format teaching in a short format world. I mean, I remember seeing commercials in the past advertising, oh, you can learn the Bible in 5 minutes a day. And things like that. That's just, it's not how it works. You don't just plug a computer program into a slot in the side of your head and suddenly it's in there. What the way you learn these things is by time.
Now, I will say this, is that currently in order to do live streams, in order to do interviews, a main portion of our time is in editing and study. And we have had some short-term funding that has allowed some professional editing, which has freed up time to where we can then learn, put out the study guides, create and start putting out the study guides. The next study guide is going to be Colossians. I'm already working on that. And also learn about how to do live streams and also start going out and finding people that we can do interviews. Having somebody be doing the editing for the video and audio has allowed time for us to do that. But that's short-term funding. That's not funding that's going to be there long-term. So if you want to see live streams and you want to see us expand into interviews and other ways, support us and go to our support page and provide us with some support, ongoing support that will then fund the editing on a longer-term basis. And that, again, frees up the time for us to be able to go off into these other areas.
And the next step, that was one of my dreams, is that the technology exists now to take our audio files and even our video files and have it translated into pretty much any of the common languages in the world instantaneously through artificial intelligence software. On the video, some of them will even change your lips to where it looks like you're actually speaking that language. So imagine our level of detail and carefulness and respect for the scriptures in Chinese, Russian, French, German, Arabic, Hindi, all these languages. We could do that. It takes money that we don't have. That's why we hadn't even looked up how much it costs. Up to now,
we just know we don't have it.
We just know we don't have it. Steve and I have not taken not a penny out of this ministry as personal pay up to now. I don't have any problem with that. The scripture teaches a worker is worthy of his wages. And the Old Testament line, Steve, don't muzzle the ox while it's plowing the field or something like that. So you let the workers feed off of the ministry, but up to now, there's just not been enough to do that. So, and there's always a long string of other expenses that were needed. So we've never taken any money out of this as far as personal pay or profit. It's always going back into the ministry. And we would just really love to grow it. It's just right now, it's the two of us. And we've managed to hire one or two kind of side people to kind of help us out. So God bless them for that help. But right now, it's just we feel this obligation to just do careful, detailed, verse by verse study and bring out everything in the scriptures rather than focus on some sizzling hot button thing that's just going to draw an audience. That's how we're approaching. So we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email, info@reasoningthroughthebible.com. And if you have questions, submit them. And we will do Q&A sessions every now and then. A lot of what we do is one way. We record these things, send them out. So we're never really sure how they're received around the world. So just let us know. We'd love to, if nothing else, just say, hey, we're listening to you and we hear from you. And here's what impact that your teachings had. So we just really thank you for being faithful listeners to the Word of God, and just stay with us as we continue to reason through the Bible.
Go to the website, reasoningthroughthebible.com. Look there for the topical and the doctrinal sections, along with the book series studies, again, where you can go and select the book and start going through it at your pace. And also look for the resource page. All of our resources that we currently have are there, and that will be continued to be added to. And again, we're putting out leader guides and also now study guides. So thank you so much for watching and listening. And as always, may God bless you.